Hey everybody, Wendell BIGFOOT 911 with Rusty William Robinson, Doctor Blues or the Blues Doctor. So, I've only met you a couple of times. I really don't know all your history or nothing. Uh, so how about tell us some of your history then?
Oh, sure. Be happy to. Yes, I am William Robinson, but I go by Rusty, and my kind of online name is the Blues Doctor. And that's because I really am a doctor. I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee, and went to medical school at the University of Tennessee there, then did residency at the Old Charity Hospital in New Orleans, and then did fellowship at USC in Los Angeles at LA County Hospital. And then for most of the time since then, which has been 40 years, almost 40 years, have been in practice at Tulane Medical School in New Orleans, all except the time we were out for the hurricane. And just retired last year. For many years, as I said, was a academic physician. So I saw patients, but I also did research and teaching and administration to some degree. I ran our cancer center for several years. Um, and now here I am. I'm retired, and my wife and I are living part-time in Orange Beach, Alabama, which is where I am now, and part-time in New Orleans, which is where our kids still live to this day. In fact, we got another grandchild on the way in New Orleans, so we were there this weekend for a baby shower for that one. So we're very happy.
Okay. So I'm throwing up a picture here for you. Tell me
Oh,
about this.
yeah, that's us. That's me. That's a band I was playing with a few years back. We called ourselves the Shinolas, Shinolas, and the most of these guys were in fact physicians at Tulane Medical School, and that's me with the cowboy hat and the Hawaiian shirt on the end. Um,
Right.
and we played a lot in clubs and parades and various other things around New Orleans for I don't know 6 or 8 years. And I think they are still some of those guys at least are still trying to do something with that on and off now. I've retired. I think one of the other guys is retired, so they kind of regrouped. But that was a lot of fun. We rode in several parades during Mardi Gras, where we would be on a float, and we'd ride down the street, down the parade route with like the big floats that they throw things from and all that, and which was great fun. You see all those people on the street at Mardi Gras in New Orleans in like this 3 hour time period. You'd be playing on the float, which was great fun. So no, I know those guys well, and they're all good guys, and hadn't seen them in a while. I may have to call one of them in the next day or two.
Uh, I've got a picture I'm trying to find here. I was going to ask you if you played with them. It was Freddie and BB King and another guy, but I can't
Might
find
have
his name here.
been. I never played BB King. It may be Little Freddie King.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
so yeah, I do know Little Freddie. He is also a New Orleans guy. Little Freddie is a guitar player, singer, composer. He's been in New Orleans for many years. Nice guy, still performing. He's 85 or 86 years old now.
yeah,
Um, and he's just nice as he can be. So he was always fun to play with. I have done that, a few times. Freddie has his own band that he still tours with, and I think it's three other guys besides him. So I never did that, but I would sit in sometimes with him.
well, the picture I was looking for was a picture of him, BB King, and another guy that you had in your. I just figured
Oh,
that,
really? I'm not
yeah,
sure who it is then.
but so when did you so you're into you're a medical doctor
I
retired
am. I am.
uh
I'm actually a GYN oncologist by training, which means that I took care of women who have genital malignancies like cancers of the cervix and uterus and ovaries. And like I said, did that for almost 40 years. And my research career was involved with that as well. Specifically, I was very interested in researching underserved communities. So, like black women in the South get much less care or have much less access to care for, particularly for gynecologic cancers than do white women. So I tried to document that. And we did some studies on how that affected those people. We did some studies on male versus female differences and how they responded to cancer therapy and a lot of other things, including immunotherapy for ovarian cancer. We were interested in HIV or AIDS in women with cervical cancer. So I kind of had a variety of things that I was interested in and researched in during my researched on during my career, and still remain interested in all of those things.
Well, did you cure any of them?
Boy, I like to think we cured some of them, and I like to think, we made some kind of a what's the right word, contribution to the medical literature. Some of the major, I guess, publications that I was on were involved with what we call clinical trials, where we examine various treatments in numbers of patients around the country, like several hundred patients at a time. Like I was a author on the study that determined that HIV infected women who were pregnant, we know that they had a risk of passing the virus on to their babies, but we did a trial that proved if you gave them a specific drug, anti-AIDS drug, prenatally, in other words, when they're still pregnant, it reduced the risk that they transferred it to their babies by over 2/3, which was a big deal. That it's become standard of care based on that. So now very few children are born with HIV infected, which is I think a big step forward. So that was one of mine.
Most definitely.
Yeah.
So why do you think they still haven't got a cure for most of these cancers?
I actually addressed that on my podcast, which is called The Blues Doctor Recommends, which actually a new episode of that came out today. But I addressed that in part 3 or 4 weeks ago, I guess. And what I said basically was particularly applies to cancer, but I think it can apply to other things as well.
Yeah.
But in particular for cancer, it's a misnomer that cancer is a single disease. It's actually thousands, if not millions, of different diseases, because cancer is different in every individual. In other words, it's not like when you get pneumonia, or to say this, it's not like when you get COVID, when, in the United States, if you are infected with COVID, that's a specific virus, and it's the same virus, in everybody who gets infected. Right. Well, it doesn't work that way for cancer. It's a different genetic change in every single individual. So in effect, instead of treating, say, several thousand patients with lung cancer in a year, right, which we know lung cancer is one of our most common ones, unfortunately, you're actually treating every one of those individually. In other words, a treatment that works for one person may or may not work for another person. So we are trying to wrap our minds around that, in a sense, in the research community by reworking the method by which we study those cancers, trying to do a study at the genetic level on individuals rather than on big populations, like 300, 400, 500 patients at a non-genetic level. And I think that's going to be the way we get closer to curing cancer, is once we truly accept and determine that each individual with cancer has a separate disease. Now, obviously, that's why it's so hard to come up with a, quote, cure for cancer, because it's not one, there's no one thing that you're curing, basically. It's something different in almost every individual. So that's kind of the point I made, that the reason it's so hard to cure cancer is that there are thousands, if not millions, of different diseases that we refer to in aggregate as cancer.
Okay. Well, what about the theory that they're not coming up with a cure because they make more money from it?
And I've heard that. We all have heard that. And I addressed this actually in my podcast a few weeks ago also. And the reason I say that's not really possible is that if you think about it, what would actually make more money for the pharmaceutical companies? You know, the pharmaceutical companies that make, say, chemotherapy drugs.
Right.
And there's around the world, there's probably 10 or 12 really big ones. Some of them are in the United States. Most of them are in the United States, but there's some all over the world. At any rate, if you think about it, if any one of those companies, say it's Novellus or what else, Burroughs Wellcome or GlaxoSmithKline, and like I said, there's maybe a dozen others. If any one of them came up with something that truly cured, quote, say breast cancer, which is another very common cancer in the United States.
Right.
What do you think the demand for that would be? It'd be astronomical. And therefore, that company would make lots more money, and their shareholders, because that's what it is. All those companies are simply, private businesses that, they report to a board, stockholders. So their shareholders would demand that they, release a cure, so they couldn't possibly do that because they have a fiduciary duty, as they say legally, to their shareholders, and they would make much more money if they found something that truly cured whichever cancer you're talking about. So that's my argument as to why that probably does not happen.
Well, I was listening to one of your podcasts, just a little bit of it, where you was mentioning who should and should not be doing the testing, the government or private
research. Who should fund medical research? Right.
You want to touch on that just a minute?
Oh, sure. So historically in the United States, which realistically, the United States leads the way in medical research all over the world and has for decades. So historically in the United States, funding for medical research really exploded after about 1970 or so. Those of us who are around then can remember President Nixon, and he declared a war on cancer. It was either in 70 or 71, I can't remember which. And he dedicated lots of money, or had Congress dedicate lots of money to the creation of a number of, as we call them, cooperative groups. And these all functioned, on federal dollars that came through the National Cancer Institute, which is the big federally funded research institute in Bethesda, Maryland, near Washington, D.C. Anyway, so they funded all these groups all over the country to do cancer research in large numbers. And those groups, in other words, the U.S. federal government, dominated cancer research around, not just in the United States, but around the world. They were clearly the leader, undisputed leader in developing new treatments for cancer around the world. Well, in the last 10 or 15 years or so, that's changed. There have always been, as you mentioned before, the pharmaceutical companies or the industry, the private companies that have been around, and they've always done some of their own research, but in the last 15 odd years or so, that ratio has changed. In other words, the amount of funding that the government puts toward medical research has dropped significantly, and the amount of money that the pharmaceutical companies put in has increased significantly. So now private industry in the United States funds most medical research. Now you might ask, well, what is the problem with that? Why is that necessarily a bad thing? And, I wouldn't say it's not that it's bad per se. I'm very much a capitalist. I mean, I absolutely believe that a private company should be able to make money for their shareholders. That's what they're there for. That's the only reason they really exist. But the problem with that is that it leaves out a significant number of questions that you might want to ask. So say you had what would be a good one? Oh, here's a trial that, in fact, I was on. So, yeah, it does. Particularly if you have a research question that doesn't make money for anybody. So like the underserved communities, if you want to find out, say you want to do a study to see why black women don't do as well when they get treated for uterine cancer as white women. There's no money in that for a drug company. So they're not going to fund that. Their shareholders wouldn't let them fund that. So that kind of funding has to come from somewhere else. And that somewhere else, like I said, used to be the federal government. And the amount of money we get from the federal government to do those kinds of studies has dropped significantly. We also get some funding from philanthropies, like private foundations that support research, but they're compared to private industry. Philanthropic dollars are drop in the bucket compared to what the private drug companies can do. So you take a risk if you let private industry dictate what you do in terms of medical research. You take a risk of leaving out a lot of questions that you would like to otherwise answer. So that's the risk you take.
All right. Well, we're going to go to another thing. I seen you were quite the wrestling fan back in the day.
Still am.
Terry Funk and all them.
Oh, yeah. No, I was actually friends with Terry and several of the wrestlers in the old Memphis territory. I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee, and was there through medical school. And I just by chance, in a sense, happened to get to know several of the wrestlers there and became friends with them. And then when we left New Orleans for Hurricane Katrina, I was in Amarillo, Texas, which is where Terry Funk lived. And we got to know, actually, his daughter was a nurse, and she worked in our cancer center for me. I remember we hired her to work in the cancer center. And, I noticed the name, her last name was Funk, which I thought was a little unusual. And so I said, "You're not related to Terry Funk, are you?" "Oh, yeah, that's my dad," which I was surprised at. Anyway, she got us together, and he did some fundraising stuff for our cancer center there in Amarillo. So I was really disappointed when Terry died a couple of years ago. But yeah, and I've been a fan of professional wrestling as long as I can remember.
Well, you remember Randy Stewart?
Randy Stewart. That name rings a bell, but I can't quite place it.
Well, he used to be a wrestler, and I've actually got an interview with him on one of my podcasts. He's now got that Channel 12 radio station, and he does all kind of podcasts and everything from there.
Oh, okay. I'll have to look for that. I know that name rings a bell, but I just can't quite. Was that like in Birmingham? Was that where he was?
He's out of Texas.
Oh, okay. Okay.
That's where he's at now. That's where he's at now. But while I was living in Atlanta, I used to be a delivery driver, and I would go up to Woodstock, Georgia, up there to a Waffle House, and I ran across Diamond Dallas Page, Buff Daddy, and several others that would hang out there.
Oh, yeah.
And I met John Smoltz from the Atlanta Braves at a gas station in Cumming, Georgia. So, and
those guys were great fun. Talented guys.
And I got a picture with Bonnie Blackstone.
Oh, yeah.
A picture with her at she was at the World of Wills with Michael Hayes and a few others.
Oh, Michael Hayes. He's a buddy of mine too. I'd forgotten about Michael. So I met Michael in New Orleans. The first time that WrestleMania came to New Orleans, which was 2005, 6, something. Now I can't remember exactly. Actually, a little later. It's more like 2011 or 12. At any rate, so I was working out in the gym, and I'd say, "Hey, Tennessee, Kentucky, Bigfoot, good to see you." Anyway, I was working at my gym in New Orleans. I go to this gym called the New Orleans Athletic Club, and I was in there one Saturday morning, and it was the weekend of WrestleMania in New Orleans, which is at the Superdome, which was maybe quarter mile from this gym that I worked out at. And so I'm on the Stairmaster, And I'll be darned, Michael Hayes walks in to the gym to come for a workout that morning. And I stopped and got off and talked to him. And I told him, I'd been a fan of his for, as long as he'd been in the business. And it turned
Yeah.
out he and I are the same age and have some similar interests, in fact, which is great. And then when WrestleMania came back to New Orleans, then I guess it was 10 years later or something like that. He came through again and sent me a note and gave us tickets. I ended up not going, unfortunately, but he's a good guy. Every once in a while, I will send him a message. He's still working for the WWE. He's 67, same age I am. So he's been doing that for 40 plus years, but he still loves it, still gets a big kick out of it. So yeah, he's a great guy.
That's like Diamond Page. He's got that therapy center that he runs now.
Yeah. Oh yeah. He's really into that and seems to do a very good job.
Yeah. I forget who it was. He was in a wheelchair and he managed to get him out of the wheelchair.
Yeah, it was, or one of them. There's been several, I think, but I guess it was last year or the year before. The wrestler named Lex Luger was in a wheelchair because Lex had like a spinal stroke, I believe it was. It put him in the wheelchair like 8 or 10 years ago, and he had done rehab or therapy with Diamond Dallas Page, and I think his therapy revolves mostly around yoga and these specific stretching exercises. And he had gotten Lex up out of the wheelchair because Lex was going to be inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame that year. And he wanted to be able to walk to the podium, to accept his award. Yeah. And unfortunately, when they got there to the town, wherever, and I forget where, well, it must have been when WrestleMania was in Atlanta, Lex got out of his plane or something like that, and he fell and he hurt himself pretty badly, and he could not walk to the podium after all that work. He managed to stand, I think, at the podium. But since then, I think is still, working hard on that. So yeah, Diamond Dallas Page does a great job with those guys.
Well, tell me your experience with the big furry fella.
Sure. And I have my experience is in one sense, I guess kind of unique in that it happened now 46 years ago. It was the summer of 1980, and I was in college at the time. And so it was summer, so I'm between, terms at college, and I was working as a lifeguard at a lake in Arkansas, kind of a resort lake in Arkansas called Blue Lake. And it was just across the Mississippi River from Memphis. So it was very close to Memphis. So I stayed over there basically the whole summer and worked as a lifeguard. A buddy of mine had me do that because his family owned the resort. So we would work as lifeguards over there, during the day. Anyway, so we're working over there, and this lake is kind of in the middle of nowhere because it's in the Mississippi Delta. So it's not levee protected, so it's really way out in the swamp kind of, and it is connected by forest and swamp all the way up and down the river for maybe at least 100 miles anyway. So we would work every day, and then most days when we would get off, we'd kick the swimmers out like at 6 or something, and then he and I would go fishing because we kept a boat over there. So one evening in June of that year, and I remember that was like the hottest summer on record, was that summer of 1980. That we had like 100 or it was over 100 degrees for like 30 plus days in a row in Memphis, Tennessee, and at Blue Lake. So it was really hot all that whole time. Anyway, one night we're out fishing. It was probably 7 p.m., but it's in June, so it's still bright, daylight. And we're fishing for crappie, and we're trolling. So we got the trolling motor on, so it's very quiet. We're slowly moving down parallel to the bank, maybe 10 yards or so offshore. because these lakes have like the cypress trees that grow up in the water, and you drop your bait down in there. You use minnows typically to catch crappie. And so we're slowly moving down, not talking, not making any noise. All of a sudden, and it was my buddy and me in the boat. All of a sudden, we hear like this rustling or noise coming from up on the bank, like I said, 10 odd yards away. We look up, and we see, just with their head and shoulders above the bush line, or the foliage line, the head of what I can only describe as something between a human and an ape or a gorilla or something. In other words, it was dark, it was hairy. The face itself was clear, but it was dark. Or in other words, the face itself did not have hair on it, but it was dark. The nose was kind of wide like an ape's. The mouth was smaller than you would think an ape's could be, so it was more like human. It did not have like a big brow ridge like apes do. So like I said, it was kind of between what you would think of as an ape and a human in appearance, at least the face and appearance. The shoulders were very wide. We estimated them, at wider than us by far, he or I. We could not see anything below, like I said, about mid chest down, because it was behind the bushes and stuff, and there's very thick, vegetation in there. This is the swamp, so it's very thick, so we can't see anything below that. Any rate, so we sat there looking at it, just staring and it was staring back at us. I think we caught it by surprise because we were so quiet. We just happened to stumble up upon it. So we stared looking at each other for maybe 10 seconds or so, pretty much face to face from 10 odd yards apart. And then at the end of it, it turned suddenly and turned from us, turned back into the bush, and we heard it running off. It ran away. We heard it running away for a while. We lost sight of it very quick because the undergrowth is so thick there. And so we heard it running away. It seemed to be running on 2 feet. It did not make any other noises or vocalizations that we could tell. We couldn't smell anything. So it was just a visual. That's what we experienced. Well, anyway, after that, he and I, of course, my buddy and I, were terrified. We didn't know what to make of this. So we hurried back to our little cabin where we were living for the summer, which was maybe quarter of a mile down the lake from where we were fishing, the spot where we saw it, and ran in the cabin, locked the door, and loaded all our guns because we were just terrified. And we decided, what are we going to do with this? Who should we tell? Should we tell anybody? They're not going to believe us. Those boys been out drinking again. They probably saw a cow or something. So we ended up not telling anybody for many years. And then finally, and then, I started medical school pretty shortly, like the next year. Yeah. And at that point I thought, oh man, do I want to say something about this in a professional setting? What are they going to think? So, I kind of put it aside. I was kind of afraid to say anything about it until years later. And this is probably now, maybe 15 years ago. I was just looking online on the internet and just looking at various things. And I searched for Bigfoot just at random. And I stumbled on the BFRO, or Bigfoot Field Research Organization. And I saw their big database. And in that, you could put, if you had a sighting, you could enter it into their database and put the location and the timing and the characteristics of the sighting and so forth. So I did. I felt, okay, now I'm pushing 50 years old. What's going to happen now if I tell somebody? Right. So I did that. I entered it in the BFRO database, and somebody from BFRO called me back to say, we were very interested in your sighting, and you're a cancer surgeon, is that right? I said, well, yeah. Can we talk to you more about that? I said, sure. And so I talked to 2 or 3 people in BFRO, and I got a few messages, but I never personally talked to Matt Moneymaker about it. And then from there, I started getting invitations or messages from other people that were interested in the Bigfoot phenomena and wanted me to speak with them on their podcast, or just wanted to interview me or do whatever. So I started doing that. From there I did I don't know, several of those. And then I started meeting people who were really interested in it and got invited to go on some Bigfoot hunts, quote, whatever you want to call those, but
Yeah.
campouts basically in areas that had Bigfoot sightings or activity of some kind. So I went to several places in Alabama, but most notably, 3 times I went to the campouts in Holland's Hunters Camp, which is kind of not far from where you are in Anniston, Alabama, in the mountains, or kind of the foothills of the
Right.
Appalachians, and went and met a lot of people, including you, and a number of others. And I've kind of stayed in contact with many of those people ever since, and made some friends with many of those. In fact, several of them have been to my house in New Orleans, and I've been to their homes in various places. So it's been fascinating. I really did not realize when I started, doing this, that there was such a community of people who were interested in the topic. And turns out they're very nice and very welcoming. And yeah, there's a good one. That's Mark and Becca Green, and we
Yeah.
were at their home, which is not far from you. It's in Sylacauga, Alabama.
Right.
So we went to see them a few months back. At any rate, so I was fascinated by this community, which is very pleasant, very close knit in a sense, but also very welcoming. If you start meeting people within the community, generally they will be glad to have you and have you come with them to go to the various meetings or campouts or whatever. People like Spencer Jameson or Greg House, or half a dozen other people that I could think of and name, that I have become friends with over the years and have really enjoyed it. So that's it. I mean, I just kind of stumbled into that, if you can say that. My signing was, like I said, 46 years ago, and I didn't do anything with it, kept it quiet for many years. In fact, the guy who I did it with, my buddy from college, died about 15, 20 years ago. So he was gone. I figured, why not share that, at this point? So I did. And that's kind of what it's led to. And that's, kind of why I ended up here with you today.
Right. Well, April 2024, Woodwalkers did their meet and greet in Land Between the Lakes. That was my
Yeah,
first.
I'm looking forward to it.
That was my first.
Oh yeah, okay.
First time I went out to anything like this.
Okay.
And then I got hanging with Mark and Rebecca, and I'm looking forward to going back this year.
Yeah, we got another one coming up. That's good. Yeah, I think I have not been to Land Between the Lakes before. I didn't make that one. Like I said, I've made several in Alabama, including some of the Holland's Hunters Camp ones, and they're always lots of fun. I always laugh and say, I've never seen or experienced anything in association with Bigfoot or paranormal or anything when I've been to Holland's, and I know a lot of other people have. And I told Coonbo, Tim Baker.
Yeah.
Coonbo, I told him, Tim, I'm like trying to see stuff and I haven't seen anything, and he'll laugh at me. So I'm all for it,
The
I'd love
last
to go
little
again. And I'm hoping to go again.
get together we had down there when we had the Alabama conference here.
Yes.
It's the only time I've actually seen anything that could possibly have been one. And I seen 3 of them that weekend.
Wow. I remember you talking about that.
Katie was seeing something that looked like the predator effect in the air going down to where you actually camped it down there with Pat and them at the bottom of the hill down there.
Yes, by Pat Harrison and Joe Parker, her husband.
Right. One of the shadows I seen was down there on a big old tree down there, and I got down there and looked at it that thing was over 9 feet tall. I couldn't be sure whether it was 9 or 10 or 11, but it was over 9. I know that.
Wow.
And it was just a shadow blocked out the tree for a couple of seconds.
So what time do you think that was, Wendell? I know it was at night, but I wonder
No, it
what time.
wasn't. It wasn't.
It
It
wasn't?
was in,
Okay.
it was in daytime, pretty close
Really?
to
Okay.
around 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon.
Really? Wow. I mean, I
Because
was around.
me and Gary was sitting there talking, and Mark and Gary seen something going through the woods behind the porta pot over there, and I got a glimpse of something going through there, which to me it looked like it was maybe 5 foot tall going through there, just a dark shadow. I didn't hear nothing, but Gary seen it head on, and Mark noticed that we both seen something, and he said, "What do y'all see?" That it was basically a shadow of something going behind the potty over there. We went out there and found tracks in the driveway.
Yeah, I remember you all talking about that.
And
No,
then
that's fascinating.
And then later that evening, when Roger got his orb video,
Right.
I
guess that's why I was thinking it was at night, because Roger got the orb video in the dark. So I
yeah,
guess I thought it was the same time.
yeah. Well, Harley came in, set up his tent, and while he was setting it up, his daughters heard something in the woods, and he got over there with Roger telling him about it, and they started flashing the flashlight down through the woods. And so I went over to see what they was looking for, and I didn't see nothing, and my legs were hurting. So I went back to my car and sat down, and I seen something that looked like the classic Bigfoot silhouette cross in front of his car, his truck rather, and go into the woods. But it was just a silhouette, and I couldn't be sure if I was seeing things or what.
Right. Well, you always question yourself, when you see something, but you can't swear to it that you've seen something real or not. You wonder,
exactly.
Is your mind playing tricks on you, or no? I get it. Absolutely.
But that's the 3 sightings I had that weekend.
Wow.
And of course, I've heard the howls from the Bigfoot howls and the Dogman howls down there.
I have heard at least one howl that could be argued could have been from a Bigfoot creature of some kind. In fact, we were walking. It was one of the evenings we were there, and a group of maybe 5 or 6 of us walked up the trail that went to the the open field area. Yeah, and we're walking up there. It's quiet. We were all quiet. It was dark, and we heard the howl come from what seemed to be the southeast of there, but still within the the mountain area.
Right.
Seemed to be a fair way away, although you can't tell from in there what the distance is. But I couldn't swear it was anything that I knew of. I first thought, could that be a coyote? And several other people said, no, I don't think that's a coyote. I think it really doesn't sound like what I would think a coyote around here would sound like. So maybe that was the real deal, that I heard that night. But that's really the extent of what I saw at Hollins. I keep walking away. I tell people, I've been there 3 times now, and I keep walking away empty-handed. So it's like I'm striking out going to bat, in baseball.
Well, that's the only place I have truly had an experience other than the K9 howls. I've heard them about 5 times in different places up and down through the forest, and even here in Anniston.
Yeah.
One night.
Oh, yeah, you're in the hills right there in Anniston for sure.
I'm right here close to Fort McClellan. I came over Baines Gap Road up there and coming back into the fort. And as you come down the mountain, it flattens out. There's a creek there. And the loudest, strongest howl I ever heard came from right there beside me in the woods right there. I tried to stop and get my phone up where I could record it or my night vision, and by the time I got stopped, it quit and gone.
Right. That's the way it always is.
But that one actually shook my innards when it did it. And me
Mm,
just riding down the road.
wow.
And then like I say, this one I was out here in the backyard about 3:30 in one morning, had the dogs out and crossed 21 out here up on top of this hill, back up in them woods up there with them other houses. I heard what sounded like the wolf howling,
Hmm.
which we know there's no wolves in this area.
Right.
And
Yeah,
I've got
I've been to Anniston, actually spent a little time there. There's a hospital there in Anniston that was one of our partners, partner with Tulane when I was running
Springfield.
the Kansas. I believe that's the name of it. And
Yeah.
we had to go there for a site visit. So myself and a couple of our staff went to Anniston and visited the hospital there and talked to some of the staff. And I kind of looked around town a little bit. I thought it was really interesting. Kind of an
Oh,
old,
no, Stringfellow.
could be. Now I can't remember for sure now.
Because
That's been
RNC was the other one down on 10th Street.
yeah, boy, I wish I could remember now. But anyway, I spent like a day or so, actually 2 days, I guess it was. And we'd look, drive around, look at the countryside, kind of see some of the sights and stuff around there. So I have spent some time there.
Yeah, well, I was born up here at Fort McClellan, actually, back in 1961. So
You've been there forever.
No, shortly after I was born, my mother and father separated, and we went to Georgia, and I lived all over Georgia with her and my stepfather. And I lived in Douglasville, Macon, McDonough, downtown Atlanta, Marietta, Smyrna, Dallas.
So you've been all over. Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of like me. I left Memphis for a residency training. That was 1985. And I went to New Orleans, to the old Charity Hospital in New Orleans, which it lived up to its reputation. I'll put it that way. You never knew what you were going to see at the old Charity Hospital in New Orleans.
Right.
And then I went from there to Los Angeles, California, at what was called the LA County Hospital, which was the same deal. Just, in fact, it was bigger than Charity Hospital. It had tremendous volume, and people from all over the world showed up at LA County Hospital. So we got a tremendous training experience there. And then, like I said, came back to New Orleans as faculty after that.
Yeah, I had seen a picture of you in front of Sun Records. I seen you in Mardi Gras. I seen you where you caught a little brim.
Yeah, fishing. Yeah. So the house we live in, that we lived, like I said, in New Orleans for many years, and we had a house, one of the old houses in uptown New Orleans that was on the parade route for Mardi Gras. And so we embraced Mardi Gras. We were there for every single parade. I rode in one of the crews, which is one of the groups that sponsors a parade every year. So I rode in the parade for years and years. And we would have parties at our house and have people show up. It like turned into a hotel at our house, basically, for 2 weeks out of the year when Mardi Gras was there. So we really had a lot of fun with that. Then, like I said, after I retired, we sold that house. We got a condo in New Orleans, so we can still go back there. But we bought a house over here in Orange Beach, and our house now is right on one of the canals that empties into the bay. So we can go fishing in my backyard. And you can catch both freshwater and saltwater species. So you might one day catch brim or bass or or I haven't caught any crappie, but some people have. But the next day you might catch a redfish or a speckled trout or something. So yeah, that's one of mine. So yeah, it's a lot of fun, where we are now. And the beach is maybe a quarter mile away, which my wife likes and our kids and our grandkids like. So we enjoy being over here.
I seen you had a bunch of flower pictures and look like
My
you.
wife is quite the gardener. So we had lots of um, plants and flowering plants at our house in New Orleans. In fact, in uptown New Orleans is just covered with flowering plants of various kinds. So I love taking pictures of all
Yeah.
those. I will tell you one interesting story about our house in New Orleans, like the one our kids grew up in. Like I said, it was in uptown, so the old part of town. The house itself was actually built in 1880, and it was built by a retired Confederate general from the Civil War. His name was Albert Blanchard. And after the war, he came back to New Orleans, and he became basically, it sounds like the CEO of the railroad there, which was the railroad that went from New Orleans proper to what was then called Carrollton. And that basically became St. Charles Avenue, which is where the streetcar is now, and is the parade route also. So the general built his house so he could walk to his office, which was right there on St. Charles. So it's like a block away. So the office for the streetcar, which was then called the New Orleans to Carrollton Railroad, was right there. So the general built his house, and it was the first house on the block in 1880. So he could go there. Anyway, the general died in the house in 1891, and it stayed in his family until after World War II. Actually, his daughter owned the house for many, many years. Changed hands a few times after World War II. And then in the late 80s, I believe it was purchased by a sort of a celebrity chef from New Orleans. There are a lot of those guys in New Orleans. Anyway, so he bought it and renovated it. And they started getting these odd reports from the house as they were renovating it that like the workers, the construction guys who were in the house working on it at the time would see and hear things that they couldn't understand and would walk off the job and not be willing to come back. And the chef himself said he would see and hear things that he couldn't really understand, but he couldn't really say anything specific much about it.
Yeah.
Any rate, he sold it and it to another family, which we bought it from. They didn't have it for very long. It was a military family, so the father was gone a lot. Anyway, so they were in the house, and this was in the 90s, I guess, now, early 2000s. Anyway, so one day the mother's and they had three little girls. One of the little girls was probably 4 or 5 years old and was the only one still at home with her mother during the day one day. And her mother's in the kitchen. The little girl runs in to the kitchen and says, "Mom, why is there a policeman in our house?"
Yeah.
Mother doesn't know what to make of that. And he said, "Oh yeah, there's a policeman on our stairs." So mother, goes up to the stairwell, and the little girl says, "Oh yeah, he was right up there at the landing." So there's the stairway, which is original to the house, is divided in two kind of, and there's a landing in the middle. So the little girl kept swearing she saw this guy in a uniform standing on the landing. Well, mother didn't know what to think about that until, oh, yep, there I am. We were on a vacation last summer, and we went into North Dakota, and we looked at all kinds of fun things, including that. Anyway, so the few months after that, the family took the kids to the Confederate Museum, which is in downtown New Orleans, and they have a number of artifacts from General Blanchard. His family had donated a number of things to the museum that had been hit, like a portrait of him that used to hang in the house, and like his uniforms and some other stuff. And so the family walks by the portrait. This is in the Confederate Museum one day. Like I said, a few weeks or months after this little girl talked about the policeman. And they're walking by, and the little girl looks at the portrait, says, "Mom, that's who was in our house before," and referring to the general, the portrait of the general. And of course, the mother is then, doesn't know really now what to make of it. So the inference was the general haunts his house. and that he probably was in full Confederate uniform, and the little girl mistook that for being a policeman. I have to say, again, no Robinsons ever saw the general or anything else we could clearly say was paranormal there. However, people who have stayed with us in that house have seen things that they thought were the general. One time during Mardi Gras, somebody came one morning after some of the parades. Somebody told me, well, I didn't realize this was a costume kind of a thing. I said, well, no, not really. I mean, you can wear a costume if you want to, but none of us here are. Well, who was the guy wearing the Confederate uniform costume last night? I said, what are you talking about? Oh, there was a guy on the stairway in a Confederate costume. And I figured he was just some buddy of yours or something who was coming in. And, I guess that could have also been the general. I don't know.
Yeah.
But like I said, we sold the house just a couple of years ago, and which we didn't want to, but it was a big old house, very expensive to maintain, and we didn't need all that room anymore, and didn't have the will to put in all the work to maintain it. So we sold the house, but the family that bought it is still going strong. They still participate in Mardi Gras. So it was a lot of fun while we had it, and had a lot of great stories from it.
Well, that's good. Did you ever have any smells that you couldn't explain in the house?
I can't think of, the one thing, not a smell, but one thing that was found under the house. So we were having some workmen do some duct work under the house for the air conditioning. So I had to replace some old ducts or something. So they're up under the house, which is built on like a 4-foot foundation or something. Everything on New Orleans is off. Most of the things in New Orleans, most of the houses are off the ground because of the flooding risk. So there's this like crawl space or a little area under the house. So the guy goes under there and they're working on the ducts, and he found an old abalone handled dagger under the house.
Oh,
that looked like somebody must have tried to hide it there. So, but he found it, brought it out, showed it to us, and we had some antique dealers look at it who said it was of the vintage from the late 19th century. So between 1850 and 1900 was all they could really say about it. So it was from the time that the general built the house, but we never really found out anything else about it. But I've had psychics look at it who swear there might be some hint of evil to it, and then like somehow somebody tried to hide it. We don't know whether it was the general or who knows what. Maybe somebody even just walking by, tossed it under the house. Who knows what? Anyway, I've still got it. I think it's here somewhere, but no, actually it's in our New Orleans condo now. But that was probably the only other really, I guess, kind of interesting, possibly paranormal kind of thing we saw in association with the house.
Well, the reason I asked that was where I lived up in Heflin, we could smell people cooking, and there wasn't no one.
Yeah, that's interesting. Now, I can't say that we ever did, smell anything like that. I can't even say really that I heard anything. I mean, the house made knocks and things, but all old houses groan, as the timbers warp and grow older. And this is most of the house is still original. So it dated back to 1880. So it was 100 and whatever that is, 40 some odd years ago. There's my buddy, Jeff Meldrum, who just died last year. And, Jeff and I knew each other. Actually, that's kind of an interesting story.
That was what I'm getting around to.
Yeah. So Jeff actually was a university or faculty member at Idaho State University for many years. And his area of expertise initially was in bipedal locomotion. In other words, how walking on animals that walk on 2 feet. And he had published significantly about that even before he got interested in the Bigfoot phenomena. And I was working on a research paper on women who had undergone radical vulvectomy for vulvar cancer, and about how they walked after that, which they have a hard time walking. So I started looking for experts on bipedal walking. I just stumbled on his name, not knowing, that he was associated with Bigfoot at all before I'd
Right.
even mentioned to anybody about that. So I contacted him, I emailed him, and we communicated by email a few times. And then several years later, I just happened to stumble on like a TV show of some sort. And I can't remember now which one it was, and he was on it.
Yeah.
So I thought, wow, I know this guy. So then I contacted him again and said, so you are on, you're have done some Bigfoot related research. He said, oh yeah. So I told him my story, and we talked about it quite a bit and got to be friends long distance. Although I did finally go to his, and I'm glad I did. We finally went. My wife and I went or traveled. We were on a trip that was to another professional meeting of ours in Idaho. So we stopped off in Pocatello, which is where Idaho State is, and went by Jeff's office and saw his lab, and he showed me all of his specimens and stuff like that, which was lots of fun, and we stayed in touch, and I kept up with him when he had a series of health difficulties over the last few years. But then I did not know how sick he was when he finally died. He had brain malignancy, and the family kind of kept that quiet. From the time he was diagnosed to when he died was a relatively short time, like weeks, basically.
Right.
And he had apparently had told the family he didn't want to, publicize that. So I didn't find out about that until after he died, I guess like pretty much everybody else did. But yeah, he was a very nice guy, very knowledgeable. And all of us who knew him will miss him.
Yeah. I wish I could have got to meet him.
Yeah, great guy. He was very accepting, even if because he knew so much. He was, very articulate, understood the mechanics and the science of bipedal locomotion in a way that very few other people did. A simple MD doesn't get it like he does. So
Right.
when I would say something stupid about it, he would gently correct me. He wouldn't laugh at me or anything. He said, that's not exactly right. Let me tell you what it really is. So he was very nice about, not belittling anybody who knew less than he did, which was pretty much everybody about
Yeah.
those topics.
I understand.
So anyway, yeah, I've done some interesting stuff. That's one thing about being retired. You can pursue some more things that maybe you didn't have the time or energy to do when you were still working full time. So I'm grateful that I'm still pretty healthy and still able to get around, and still do some of these things that I was didn't really feel like I should or could when I was working full time. So it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, I've got to where I can't stand up for a long time or walk very far. So I stay basically in camp unless somebody asks me to ride with them somewhere to look at something.
Well, I'm not sure that that's not as good as, if you go to a place like Hollins or like LBL, I'm not sure that there's any benefit to trying to walk and hike out in the woods there versus just staying in the area, just sitting still and letting them come to you.
My encounters that was in
Yeah,
camp.
exactly. So I don't know that there's that much benefit to being able to hike long distances, in that kind of a situation.
Other than finding tree structures, maybe.
Yeah. Maybe you stumble on footprints or something if you walk around a lot, but just for an encounter with a potential living creature, may as well just sit around the campfire and let them come to you if they're going to.
Yeah. Let me pull up a picture here right quick.
Unfortunately, I seem to sleep through all of it. I remember one time at Hollins. Oh, I was so tired because I'd driven up that day, and I drove from New Orleans, and it was a long drive. Seemed like long drive, 7 or 8 hours. I don't know how long it was, and I was so tired. And we ate dinner or something at the camp and sat around and talked for a while. And I remember I thought I'm just going to go rest for a little bit. It was probably 8 or 9 o'clock, probably at night, and I'll be down. And I passed out and didn't wake up, until 8 o'clock in the next morning. So I keep sleeping through, the good stuff apparently.
Well, like this picture right here, I found that just driving along the road going to the campsite, and we
Wow.
try not to say the campsite's name no more.
So how high up do you think that was
That
when?
was at least 7 foot tall. It was a
Okay,
twist break. There was nothing anywhere around it to mark, show what made it come down.
right. So it
But
didn't
it
look
was
like it was a storm or anything that knocked a bunch of
no,
trees over.
no. And that's also where I found that upside down tree at down there. Uh, on
Yeah, I
the
remember you
same
talking about
road,
that too.
on the same road,
Is
just
that the
riding down
road
the road
into the
looking.
camp?
Yeah,
Oh, okay. Yeah, that road is out in the middle of nowhere. I could easily see, finding something like that.
but yeah, there's quite a few uh arches, X's, tree breaks. Actually, did a little video on this one when I found it, showing that there was nothing at either end of it to make it fall or break or
Right.
anything.
So here's my question about that. So what do you think? And I know I'm putting you on the spot a little bit, but this is purely speculation.
Speculation.
What do you think is the purpose or meaning or whatever you want to attach to that if you presumed that this was done by a Bigfoot type creature?
I would think it was be pointing towards the creek or
Okay,
water for that particular one. I think
could
maybe
be.
an X is for letting other uh, critters passing through know, don't come this way because this is
Okay.
where we stay at.
Yeah,
But that's just my
could be.
opinion.
Yeah. I mean, nobody can tell you you're wrong.
And the arches, they're the same thing. I think they're pointing towards food or water as well, usually water.
Yeah.
So,
I've
and
wondered about some of the tree structures where they seem to look like they're making like a kind of a teepee or something out in the
yeah,
woods.
I've
I have never
seen,
seen one of those, but I know people who have. What do you think about those?
I think they might be just places that they get in out of the sun where
Could
they're
be.
watching uh, things coming and going.
Yeah.
Uh, I got
And they
one
can
that
kind
I
of
found
hide
on,
during the day in a sense.
yeah, just kind of like I say, shading themselves from the sun where they lay there cool and see
Yeah.
what's going around. What we call the watchers, uh, where they would take a break underneath there to see what's going on around them and uh, see if I got that picture of that one I found. I was going up to Cheehaw Mountain and
Mm-hmm.
I just kind of glanced up on top of the hill on the side of the road and seen one. Uh,
Like a tree break, you mean?
no, it was like a teepee.
Oh, okay.
I'm going through my pictures right now,
Yeah.
seeing if I have it on my laptop here where I can just show it. And I don't see it. I just got to the bottom. But there is the upside down tree.
Oh, yeah. 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 I remember seeing that picture before.
And,
Yeah. That's fascinating.
and that spot there, they look like they come in there, cleared out the trees to keep them from falling on the power lines, and something took one of them and stood it
Right.
upside down.
Yeah. Amazing.
But
So what do you think? Here, there's another one. I'll kind of put you on the spot. So don't feel like, I'm very gentle about this.
I'm good
What do
with
you
it.
think about the so-called woo factor? In other words, the apparently supernatural, phenomena that seems to surround these things sometime.
Well, I'm thinking that Ron Moorhead has come closest to answering that question as anybody. Everything is electricity and vibration. So if they can adjust their frequencies and vibration, maybe they can just disappear. Which that's because we can't see the difference.
Right. It doesn't mean they disappear. It means we can't see them. We can't see that wavelength, whatever it is.
Exactly. That's like the polar bear. It's not a white bear. It's a black bear, but it looks like it's white.
And we know there are certain animals of a variety that use
camouflage
vibrations are like infrasound to make their the animals around them like feel weird or bad or something.
Yeah.
And it's presumed that some of them use them for prey, like to scare their prey or paralyze their potential prey. Right. So could a creature like a Bigfoot have some capacity for that? Why not? If a tiger can do it, then why couldn't something else?
Well, and for there's how many lizards change colors? Octopuses.
Lots.
Octopus has no known genes that it should even be on this planet. So
it's like an alien all to itself.
Yeah. And they do some amazing things as far as they're escaping their enclosures.
They're very smart.
I've seen one that got tired of having the light on all the time, was shooting a stream of water up into the light, shorting it out in the ceiling. And then
I don't think I've seen that one, but I've seen some of those, and they're just amazing what they.
And then after it finally got the light knocked out one evening, it climbed out of the cave and went down through a floor drain and escaped.
That's just amazing.
Yeah. And
I know what else I meant to tell you, Wendell.
Anyway, with what they can do.
Oh yeah. In fact, I was meaning to mention this to you. I have studied the Patterson-Gimlin film a whole lot, and that in part because I was maybe 9 or 10 years old when it originally came out. It actually was made into a theatrical piece and appeared all over the United States in whatever year that was, 1968, maybe somewhere around there.
Yeah.
So I remember going to the theater with my father and grandfather, and we saw that film, and I was just fascinated by it.
Yeah.
Which actually interesting. Jeff Meldrum was the same way. He and I were the same age too. And he remembered going to see it that year too. At any rate, so, I started wondering about that. And one of the things about that I thought was interesting, and in fact, I suggested this to Jeff Meldrum, was that creature that's in the film has what appears to be a defect or a lump or something in its right thigh, just above the knee, so that when it walks, when it takes steps, you can see this lump kind of move up and down.
Some people have suggested that was a juvenile's foot.
I have heard that. I'll tell you what my speculation is that this was a female. We've always thought it was a female.
Right.
So one injury that can, and we assume also that this was a mature female. In other words, this is an adult female that this creature was. So one injury that can occur in adult primates, including humans, is during childbirth, when a woman is in labor and pushing hard and stretching hard, she's got her legs up and spread, and she's trying real hard and spreading her legs very rapidly and putting down so much force, because the force the uterus puts down in labor is tremendous.
Yeah.
That you can actually tear the what's called either the sartorius or the quadricep muscles, and those are those muscles in the thigh, anterior thigh, that you can see, when you're like looking at the a front-on picture of a primate. And I wonder if that creature, Patty, everybody refers to her as, could have had that injury occur in childbirth, because you can actually see what appears to be either the quadricep or sartorius muscle contract and expand with each step she takes. So I wonder, in humans, what would happen if a woman had that injury? It would get repaired surgically quickly, like within, a few weeks or months after childbirth. But in that creature, that you would assume would just learn to live with it.
Yeah.
And that, you look at that gait. You remember how the gait is so odd, and it's difficult for a human to reproduce that gait. Maybe that's because this thing had this injury in childbirth and then just learned to deal with it by walking this kind of particular odd way. And you can see the results of that in her right anterior thigh. Anyway, that's my theory about it. I remember Jeff and I talked about that several times. He was not as sold on it as I was, but he was willing to listen, to his credit.
Well, yeah,
so we discussed
you're
it
in a different
times.
profession, so you would notice something like that.
Oh, I told him, I said, yeah, if you've never seen a woman in labor, have you? He said, no, I have. So yeah. I knew the kind of forces that would be placed upon, the muscles in the lower extremity when a woman was in labor and delivering a baby.
Yeah, that's a totally interesting concept. I hadn't ever even thought of something like that. And
I'll say I have no proof. I have no objective data other than what we're seeing, on the Patterson-Gimlin film. So it is purely a hypothesis or speculation. I like to think it's well-informed speculation.
Yeah,
but it is speculation.
What I would think it would be in your case. I got some noise going on.
Yeah, I see in the chat, people are speculating about that also. And yeah, I certainly don't have any reason to think I'm absolutely correct. It's just, an idea. So Pyromedic says, Wendell, if the doc asks you to turn your head and cough, give him the Jack Nicholson face. That's pretty funny.
I spotted that about the same time you did.
That's pretty good. I know who Pyromedic is. He's funny.
Yeah, I met him at the last meet and greet we did up at LBL. He is a fantastic guy.
Anyway, that's about all of my stories, I guess, about Bigfoot. I'm looking forward to going again to the meet and greet coming up. Still kind of trying to figure out the logistics of that for me, because we're going to have to go from, I guess I'll probably be coming from Orange Beach. So again, that'll be a long drive to get to Land Between the Lakes from here. So I hadn't exactly figured out when I would get there or when I would leave, but I'm looking forward to coming nonetheless.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to being there too, seeing everybody and meeting some of the folks that I haven't met before.
Right.
I got to get their pictures. You know that? I got to Wendell.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, Wendell, I'm going to let you go because my wife is waving at me that we're about ready for dinner. So,
all right,
listen, I really appreciate you having me. Thank you so much.
It's been a great show. I've enjoyed it immensely.
Me too. Anytime. Be happy to have you. One of these days, maybe maybe if I ever do a live version of the Blues Doctor Recommends, I might have to get you on.
Okay. Well, I want to thank everybody in chat for coming in, sticking with us for an hour. And I know I hadn't been able to respond to nobody in chat because I'm just ain't got it
Yeah, I know. I was
coordinated
monopolizing
enough to do
things.
that. All right. Well, I'm going to put the
All right, buddy.
in, but you need to hang on for just a minute till I get
Okay.
everything settled up. All right.
All right. Good to see everybody.